And I'm really excited about our next guest. One of my really good friends in sports media helped me get going, and he's here to talk some Flyers with us, Mr. Brian Startare. Brian, how are you?
Frankie, is that you, my friend?
Oh, it's me, my friend. What's up?
Well, if anyone's enjoying a season that I know, it'd be you with this baseball. I guess you're enjoying the Be Bold season, huh, with the Phils. Some great stuff going this year.
It seems like, as we were just saying earlier, it seems like everything's going great across the four sports right now. You know, it's really hard to argue with the Super Bowl championship and the Sixers season being what it was, and this great Phillies start. And the reason why we have you here is because, as author of Flyered Up and This Day in Philadelphia Sports, you know a thing or two about the Philadelphia Flyers, and they're kind of getting lost behind all this other stuff right now. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, I guess it's rightly so right now. I mean, if you in your pecking order, I mean, the Sixers showed a giant step. Of course, the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and again, the Phils are in contention to be the playoffs for the first time since 2011. So I think it's about time for the Flyers. I mean, let's face it. Ron Hextall has been patient, but they haven't been out of the first round since, 2010 or 11? I mean, it's time to get going, and they spent some money this year in free agency with James Van Riemsdyk, and there seems to be some added optimism. But I think I speak for a lot of Flyer fans out there to saying, it's time for the Flyers to take that next step.
Now, one of those young, promising pieces. In fact, let me ask your opinion, because I think we'll probably agree. We're talking a lot about young stars in the city of Philadelphia. Who is your young Flyers star, and why don't you tell us about him?
Well, the young Flyer star. Well, I think it's going to be Morgan Frost when he gets here. He was the player involved in that trade last year when the Flyers moved up and got another number one pick. And if you read anything like Bill Meltzer, the great Flyers writer on the Flyers website and various hockey sites, including Flyerdelphia, Frank, we know that well.
Back in the day, yeah.
He raves about Morgan Frost and his playmaking. Not sure absolutely if he's going to make this year's roster and all, but the Flyers have a bevy of players in their farm system that could make that next stop soon. I'm talking about Yerman Rubtsov, who was a first rounder back in 2016. Of course, Morgan Frost, a first rounder in 2017. You have Mike Vecchione, another guy that was signed as an NCAA player back in March of 2017. Isaac Ratcliffe is another huge guy who could work on his skating a little well. He was a second-round pick. So the pipeline, not even on the roster right now, is at Carter Hart. Let's not forget about him, who's probably going to spend this year with the Phantoms in Lehigh Valley, but will be your goaltender of the future. So not only is there optimism for the players on the ice right now, which we'll get to in a second, but the Flyers, through Ron Hextall's drafting and trades, has done a tremendous job of building this pipeline, and Flyers are considered to have one of the best farm systems in the NHL. If you're talking current right now, Frank, I have to look no further than the year that Sean Couturier had last year. He was just phenomenal. He should have won the Selke Trophy as the best defensive forward. He took a giant step forward, obviously, in scoring. He's a great penalty killer. And you look at that first line now: Claude Giroux, Sean Couturier, and Travis Konecny, all drafted in the first round, all drafted by the Flyers. That first line, I'm waiting to see him take another step forward this year, and then boom. Let's get into the second line, too, now with JVR, Patrick, and Jacob Voracek. Flyers top six now. If they all stay healthy, it's pretty intimidating.
Hey, Brian, this is Ryan here. So you set me up perfectly. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I want to ask you about Nolan Patrick, because the NHL Network chose him as the guy that's going to be the number one guy for the breakout season in the 2018-2019 NHL season, and now put him next to JVR, who is a finisher. Patrick is the setup guy. And how is that 1-2 punch going to play out, you think, if that's the actual number two line there for the Flyers?
Well, remember the old adage against the Flyers where they were a one-line team and they were really easy to shut down. Mm-hmm. You just put your best defensive forwards on Giroux, Couturier, and Konecny, and there you would have it. But now, as we both have said now, this second line, you're adding a guy who scored 36 goals last year, James Van Riemsdyk. Not the greatest skater in the world, but man, you cannot teach goal scoring. It is innate. He knows how to touch and the finish around the net. And then you mentioned your question with Nolan Patrick. Patrick at first, he seemed like he had to get his sea legs, so to speak, in the NHL. In the first half of the season, I think he was hurt with that abdominal injury he had, and was trying to feel his way in the NHL. But towards the end of the season, I mean, you could just see why the Flyers were so excited to get him number 2 overall last year. I mean, he made the club. Remember, he's just 19 years old, so a young guy and terrific hands, good speed, and just an all-around great hockey player. And I'm excited to see the fact that he's going to be in between a 36-goal scorer in James Van Riemsdyk and then Jacob Voracek, who 2 years removed, almost 100-point season. So I think Jake's going to bounce back as well. I love that second line. I think it's going to be a lot of scoring out there. And again, the Flyers added 30 goals. And let's not forget now, though, after that 1-2 punch, now you have Wayne Simmonds to go with Lindblom and Wheel on the third line. And Simmonds now entering a very important year in his tenure with the Flyers, the last year of his contract. So just adding that one piece on the left wing with James Van Riemsdyk, a goal scorer, makes Nolan Patrick that much better and takes off a little bit of the pressure and a little bit of the breakdowns on Jake Voracek, because it's easy to double to body here. There's a lot more. There's one more person to be accounted for out there on the ice. So I'm really excited to see what the second line can do.
Brian, you should just ask yourself the questions, because you segued again into my next question. So I don't know what I'm doing here,
You're not
honestly.
giving me anything to say either, Brian.
So you talked a little bit about the third line, and listen, the JVR edition gets me excited. It adds finally some depth, some goal scoring. So that top 6 is all well and good, but that third line, I need more information from you, number 1. And number 2, who's going to be the center of that third line?
Well, it looks to be Jordan Wheel, who by the way, did not have a great year last year. I mean, he closed the season prior really well with some goal scoring and, quite frankly, played himself into a new contract with the Flyers. But Jordan Wheel looks to be that center on that third line right now with Oscar Lindblom and Wayne Simmonds. Now, Simmonds is the interesting part there, because Simmonds had a tough season last year. He had a variety of injuries, and anyone who watched hockey, anyone who watched the Flyers, you could tell that Wayne Simmonds was not the Wayne Simmonds of old last year. He just was hurt, didn't have a very good season at all. And, even though it's to the Flyers' detriment, I love guys in contract years. They have something to prove. Wayne Simmonds knows that this is probably going to be his big last payday. There's talk out there that he could probably get a 6 or 7 year deal out there, 7 per. I'm not sure if that comes for the Flyers anymore. And it's a shame, because Wayne Simmonds, a very popular guy in the room, a guy that is just tremendous in without the puck. He's a guy that's it's tough to get the puck off him. He's just tremendous in the offensive zone, and he's got that tenacity, and he's a very popular Flyer here. The Flyers finally have some flexibility and finally have some cap space, but I'm not really sure if they're willing to go out there and they're going to give Simmonds a long-term deal. That's going to be a situation to look at throughout the rest of this offseason and into next season.
So what is there to do with this cap space that they have? Because, they don't have to spend the money if they're working on the long-term plan very well, like it sounds like you're saying. They're doing a good job at it. So what do you do with the money if you're the Flyers and it's today, July 30th?
Well, like I said, I think they have right around, $11 million. First time in a long time. Remember, though, you have to re-sign Ivan Provorov, too, and I would make sure that he gets a long-term deal right away. I would lock him up. Provorov is a guy that, to me, I know Giroux had a 100-point season, and I know there's some good players up and down this lineup, but Ivan Provorov is your best player. It's not even close in my mind, and I would lock him up. So instead of taking care of their own guys, I mean, if they don't give the money to Wayne Simmonds, I mean, they can always look at free agency in years to come. You mentioned Ron Hextall, and he has that money. He's shown to have a patient approach. Now, a lot of fans aren't being so patient any longer, so we'll see what happens. But I wouldn't want to see them go right back into salary cap hell, so to speak, just for the sake of of spending the money that was available. It's nice to see the Flyers finally have some cap space. And the good thing about it also is that when Carter Hart is ready, perhaps next season, you're not going to have to spend $6-7 million on a top-flight goaltender. Then you'll have Andrew McDonald's contract finally off the books. So the Flyers, and again, you don't want to say wait another year, But I'll tell you, not this season, but the seasons after that, this team should be ready to contend for quite some time. So, again, I wouldn't speculate just because you have it. I mean, the Flyers still need a penalty-killing forward. I would like to see the Flyers go out there and try to get one of those, just because the fourth line doesn't really send shivers up my spine. I'd like to see that.
And who do you think is out there, Brian?
Well, you know what? I couldn't even tell you right now, Frank. I couldn't tell you right now, like absolutely who's out there, but that's not my job. It's Hextall's job to go find them out there. You give me about 20 minutes. I'll go see who's out there. I'll play GM. I just like to make my opinion known. That's all. But I'd like to see him get a penalty killing forward out there. Perhaps another defenseman out there. I know they picked one up from the Kings, a free agents from the Kings. So we'll see what happens with the rest of the offseason. I don't think Hextall's done, but I think the big moves are probably gone, unless he has a blockbuster somewhere. But that remains to be seen.
So this is the club that you see opens next season. Where do you see them ending up? Because there's a lot to talk about for the future, but what about next season, right? Because fans are impatient sometimes, right? And they might want to see some games won this year. So what do you expect for this Flyers team?
Last year they finished third. And again, they played tough in the first round against the Penguins. But one thing that I always say, well, not always say, but lately, is that when you watch the NHL playoffs and you watch teams like Pittsburgh or you watch teams like Tampa, and then you look at the West with Nashville, and then you see the Caps, the Flyers' overall game needs to be picked up a level or two. And I say that not to be totally negative against this team, but I mean, when you watch the NHL playoffs, when you watch the finals between Vegas, even Vegas, a first-year team, the speed in which their game was being played and the special teams, it just needs to go up a notch. I do think, though, with James Van Riemsdyk, the addition, with another year for Provorov and Ghostin experience on the back end, I think this team could take that next step, but I still don't think this team can get to a Stanley Cup final as currently constructed. But again, anything can happen once you make the postseason. But again, I do see down the line this team's going to be a team to be reckoned with. And then, I can't believe we've been talking for 7 or 8 minutes and haven't said the magic word of goaltending because
we've got about 40 seconds left to do it. So.
Well, I'll say what they need more. I'm not sold on Brian Elliott. Hopefully he stays healthy. Michael Neuberg can't stay healthy. Alex Lyon will battle for that backup spot and hold spaces until Carter Hart gets here. But you got me waiting. You got me ready for hockey season. I want to enjoy my summer still, though.
And we'll save the goaltending discussion for next time. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Brian Startare, check out his books, Flyered Up and This Day in Philadelphia Sports. Highly recommended. I know Father's Day is over, but it's always a good Father's Day gift, This Day in Philadelphia Sports, and it's absolutely timeless. So, Brian, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Keep up the great work, Frank.